Today is Sunday, June 8th, 2025. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemar. Hashem says to Moshe, this is in our Torah portion this week, the Parsha Baloscha, Aseh lecha shtei Chatzotzrot kesev, make for yourself 2 trumpets of silver, v'hayu lecha lemikra ha'eda u'lemasa ha'machanos. The camp was very, very large. If you figure there had to have been several million people there, and they're all spread out, encamped in the desert, so there had to be some way to communicate with all of them. So God commands that there be a system of alerts that would come from these 2 Chatzotzrots, these 2 silver trumpets. And Hashem explains that this sound is used when you want to gather the people, and that sound is used when you want to tell the people to get ready to travel. And then the Torah goes on as follows. Ubnei Aaron HaKohanim yisku b'chatzotzrot v'hayu lachem l'chukas olam l'dorosechem. This requirement to have these trumpets was not only for communication and an alert system during the 40 years that they're traveling through the desert, but it is l'dorosechem in every generation. They would use this in every generation. For example, the Torah says, when there will be an enemy that comes on you. So you have to sound an alert, like today, like there's a siren. So the Chatzotzrots would sound this alert. And also, very different situation, the times that you celebrate, on Yom Tov and on Rosh Chodesh, then you would also blow the Chatzotzros. And this should be something that you remember, and it is a commandment from God. We have studied before that the Ramban derives from this passage the meaning of the different sounds we blow on Rosh Hashanah, because the Torah here mentions tekiah and teruah. And the Ramban explains the meaning of both, which was very different, based on what it was the reason for gathering the people. And from there, we have discussed a number of times how we are to understand the different sounds, the reasons we make different sounds, tekiah, teruah, shvarim, on Rosh Hashanah, and what they mean in connection with each other. We've discussed that in the past. We'll leave that for now. But there's a very, very strange question. The Pasuk makes it clear, and the Rambam says this explicitly, that the Chatzotzrots were not only used during the time that the Jews were traveling through the desert, they were for all generations. So that means once they reached Israel, and even once they had a Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim, they would still use the Chatzotzrots for if there was an enemy coming, or if there was a celebration, or a Yom Tov, they would still use them. So this was L'doros, it was for all generations. But if that's the case, then there's a passage of the Talmud that's very difficult to understand. The Talmud says in Masechta Menachos, the Talmud says that Moshe was commanded not to pass the trumpets to the next generation. Because the Torah says, Aseh lecha, God says to Moshe, Aseh lecha, make for you. You make trumpets for you. When it comes to Yoshua, your successor, Yoshua will make trumpets for himself. And in each generation, the leaders of the generation will make their own trumpets new. Which is very strange, because That doesn't apply to any of the other utensils in the Mishkan and later the Beis HaMikdash. It is not the case that when Moshe handed over his leadership to Yoshua, that Yoshua built for himself a new ark, a new menorah, a new altar. No, those were made and they were used for many, many generations, for centuries. Why was it necessary the Chatzotzrot had to be made new in each generation? I mean, it's not like they wear out. Why do they have to be new in each generation? So I want to share with you an insight from Rabbi Kenny Brander, a friend of mine and a colleague and someone from whom I learn a tremendous amount. Rabbi Kenny Brander lives in Israel. And he makes the following suggestion, and I think it's very, very important for us to understand, especially today. He said what the Mishkan represents, and later what the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, represents. It represents God's presence, it represents the Torah, and it represents the covenant, the relationship between God and the Jewish people, the ongoing relationship. As the Ramban says, we quoted this before also, the ongoing revelation of the Torah to the Jewish people was expressed through the Mishkan and later the Beis HaMikdash. The event at Sinai was elongated and continued in the Mishkan and later in the Beis HaMikdash. The Anan, the cloud of glory, indicated that God's presence was dwelling within the Jewish people. Those are constants. The connection between God and the Jewish people is unwaverable and it is eternal. There's no need when one leader leaves and another leader comes to make a new ark with new luchos. There's no need. The words of the luchos are eternal. The ark is eternal. Nothing changes because there's a different leader, because it's a new generation. Just because it's a new generation, there's no need for a new menorah. The menorah, which symbolizes the spirituality of the Jewish people and the connection with God, that doesn't change. Leader to leader, generation to generation. Our worship of God, our loyalty to observing the mitzvos of God stays the same from one generation to another. And that continues and continues. And the same thing applies to David HaMelech and then to Shlomo HaMelech and keep going all the way through. The connection to God, the connection to mitzvos, the connection to Torah, it doesn't change. But the needs of the community are always changing. The way that one generation's leaders interact with their people in calling them together, in warning them, in celebrating with them. The people, we face new circumstances. And the way that we call the people together in a time of war is very different than the way we call people together in a time of peace. And all of that is very different than the way we call people together in a time of celebration. And though our connection to God is constant, but the way that we communicate with each other, the way that we express our leadership, that has to be dependent on the needs of that generation. That changes from generation to generation. And that means in every generation there are new demands on its leaders that were different than the demands on the leaders of the generation before. Moshe had the demands upon him to be able to have his generation come together in the aftermath of hundreds of years of slavery, and now they're faced with freedom, And now they're traveling to Israel, and there are setbacks. It's a whole complicated set of circumstances that Moshe faced in dealing with his generation, in leading his generation, and the sounds he had to make, the way in which he brought them together, and the way in which he ordered them to travel. That was unique for them, for their needs and their circumstances. Each generation needs its own way of communicating with its people. What we need today is certainly very, very different. We need trumpets. Yes, we do not have this mitzvah. But the idea of this mitzvah, we need to be able to communicate with the Jewish people. In Israel, of course, but Jewish people all over the world, that relates to our specific circumstances. We have to be able to relate to the entire Jewish people today while maintaining optimism and courage in the face of this prolonged war with rising casualties, Nebuch, and hostages still in captivity. One hostage's body was returned, okay? Baruch Hashem, thank God. But there's still more, some alive, some dead. And still, many, many people in Israel displaced from their homes, still. And even we here in Montreal and across the world, living with the reality of anti-Semitism that most of us, myself included, as I've said before, have never experienced in our lives. Some of you have. But most of us, I've never experienced anything like this. And at the same time, we need to find a leadership and a way of communicating with our people that recognizes this amazing phenomenon, which we have discussed many times, of the inspiring leadership and strength that is found within young people in Israel today, on the battlefront and in the home front. As I said to you before, I had such great privilege to meet so many of them on my recent trip to Israel. It is such a hopeful thing for the future of Israel to see its young people taking their place as our leaders and showing resolve and strength and wanting to bring the people together. It's the dawn of a new era. I've used that phrase before in Israel. Because the truth is that the state of Israel continues to flourish, and Am Yisrael continues to flourish. And we need trumpets that produce sounds that will enable us to elicit connection with God. The connection with God is constant. But the way that we keep people together, the way that we try to maintain cohesion in these very difficult and challenging times with the ups and the downs, as I've said, the dark and the light, we need to find the ways to communicate for the world we live in today. And that's why the utensils of the Mishkan, the Beis HaMikdash, they're eternal. The relationship with God is constant. But how we communicate to the people, what is the tone of the message, that depends on each generation. Each leader of each generation has to figure out, how do we reach every single Jew, both in Israel and around the world? It's not an easy task. But this is the mitzvah given to us in our Torah portion. Not only to make the trumpets, it's probably not so hard for someone who knows how to do it to make a silver trumpet, but to be able to figure out how to use it for the time in which it is needed, that requires real leadership. And that is the essence of this mitzvah. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.